We live in a time where information moves faster than our ability to process it. Notifications, headlines, partial stories, and endless scrolling have created a world where reactions often happen before reflection. A moment of curiosity quickly turns into an emotional response, and the line between information and interpretation becomes harder to recognize. In this conversation, licensed professional counselor Shelly Ketelhut explores what that constant stream of information is doing to the way we think, react, and relate to each other. Shelley explains how the human brain is wired to respond quickly to perceived threats, and how social media platforms and rapid fire news cycles can activate that same fight or flight response. When that happens, the emotional parts of the brain take over, while the systems responsible for judgment, reflection, and critical thinking struggle to catch up. We talk about confirmation bias, partial narratives, and how people often fill in the gaps in a story with their own experiences and assumptions. Over time, that process can create strong beliefs based on incomplete information. But this conversation is not about rejecting technology. It is about learning how to create distance from it. Shelley shares practical strategies for building healthier digital boundaries, strengthening critical thinking, and slowing down our reactions so we can respond thoughtfully instead of reflexively. Because in a world that moves this quickly, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is pause. Welcome to No One is Normal, the podcast where real stories remind us that none of us are alone. You can also visit the website www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co for resources, updates, and future podcast episodes. I am Brad H. Hill, and each week we talk about the messy, the complicated, and the deeply human moments that shape us and remain in our memories. I am not here to tell anyone how to live. I am here to offer the stories, the insights that made me realize that no one is normal, including me, because healing starts when self-honesty begins. Hi, Shelley. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Hey, Brad. Nice to see you.
Tell me a little bit about you and what do you do for your career?
Sure. I am a licensed professional counselor and a clinical substance abuse counselor. And so I have a private practice in which I work with individuals and families from ages, I'd say 10, 12 and up. And that is, that is what I do professionally.
That's got to feel like a good thing to be able to help people.
Yes, I once saw Dave Letterman had a guest on, and she had said something to the effect that just that adage, right? If you find a job that you feel passionate about, you never work a day in your life. And I do truly feel that way. I love my work. I feel honored to join people in their journey. And I often feel really humbled that they invite me into the most private corners of their world and their life experiences.
Yeah, that's got to be something to have somebody put that much trust in you to have that conversation. That's got to
Absolutely.
be huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never take that for granted. And I try to honor that and always take it as serious as it is.
Well, very good. Um, what is happening culturally right now that makes information feel overwhelming instead of empowering?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would say this comes up a lot, both professionally in my office as well as socially with family and friends, and that the world feels really heavy for a lot of people right now. And that it's a lot to manage everyday life for people in maintaining their professional work or their schooling, families, social connections, their self-care. And even hobbies and staying connected. And then on top of it, putting things such as political happenings, global insecurities, financial stress, fears about the environment, putting all of those things on top of what maybe already feels heavy for people to navigate. It's been a lot for people, and overwhelming is a really great word. Is I hear that frequently in that I think what happens culturally right now is we live in an environment where things are happening so quickly, so fast. And that I think we're just not built to manage that much that quickly. And that's overwhelming. And I think oftentimes, I have a lot of clients who tell me, or friends who have expressed, feel like they only know a little bit about a lot of things. And there is a lack of comfort or empowerment in not feeling like they can really wrap their heads around or feel like they've completed a cycle of information.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems like as soon as you kind of get something a little figured out, all of a sudden left field comes and like, well, where'd that come from? So you're
Yeah.
constantly just trying to figure out what to believe, what's true,
Yeah.
and what's propaganda and what is just bots. You hear about that
Hmm.
all the time. And, you post something, all of a sudden you get like people without a picture just attacking you. And it's like, what did
Yeah.
I do and why are you attacking me?
Well, I think there's a whole new vocabulary, right? Clickbaits. What's the bots, the right that they talk about, the bots who go out, right? What you're talking about without the picture and personally attacking people. There's a whole new vocabulary that also requires energy to learn about how these things work and how to take care of ourselves through that, in addition to just trying to navigate what's true. How do I manage that?
Yeah, and it's got to be hard, especially people trying to do self-care and they're constantly getting distracted while they're trying to care for themselves with all this stuff that's going on. So it's just making it hard for them to self-care, and then they're getting all these negative aspects coming at them.
Yeah. And I'm often curious, what is self-care mean to people? We hear that term a lot. That happens frequently. A lot of clinical terms get adopted socially. And I think sometimes when that happens, it gets diluted and watered down, and that's concerning to me. I think oftentimes what I see socially or culturally happening as self-care means a hot bath at the end of the day. And I don't think, I mean, that can be self-care. That's wonderful. What a great way to relax. And I think there's a lot more meaningful ways to take care of ourselves in this information rapid fire digital world, and being cognizant and aware of that, and um, being more open about what that looks like
We spend a lot of time in our 9 to 5, and then we've got our 5 to 9 afterwards. And you got to find something that kind of helps feed your soul.
versus the echo chamber and of social media, right? And that instead of winding down, oftentimes that 5 to 9 tends to be an emotional winding up for people, in that talking about, say, clickbaits or a rapid fire headline or breaking news, the notification with, right, 3 words that gets an emotional response out of us that is actually a reaction, and then this whole neurological process happens that hooks us into our survival system. And so, correct, we're not winding down at the end of a long day where we have managed the stressors of our everyday life. We've now, right, ramped up.
Why do people feel more certain about things while actually understanding less?
Oftentimes, what happens though in that situation, that headline, that rapid fire notification, often taps into a cognitive bias we might have, right? A belief we have already created and have subscribed to within ourself. It provides, right, a check mark of evidence to confirmation you were correct. And so, in response to that, we often have a whole chemical reaction to that being right. So earlier I had stated that this is part of our survival system. And so I have It's been explained to me. I'm not the expert in this. I just read a lot and have taken a lot of continuing education courses to help explain it to others, that survival mechanism requires a fast and extreme response from us, right? We hear something, we perceive something that is potentially a threat to our well-being. Our survival requires us to act quickly. And so that is the response that gets activated in those quick headlines, those notifications. And so we are prone then to feel more certain about those things versus having that space and that distance to help us understand more. I had read an example of that would be in early human history. If we heard a rustling in the bush behind us and we would, right, receive that stimuli, we'd be off, we'd be out. That is survival versus stopping and being curious about what's in the bush that could lead to our demise. And that's what that system is meant for us to do. It's either meant for us to fight or flee. And in those situations, we feel certain.
We all have that fight or flight response, and it's meant to be there to save us from our environment. Something happens, we got to be fast to react. What does it cost when we react faster than we think?
Our peace, our sense of security, feeling empowered, stability. It costs us a lot. Although a lot of people would say that in those moments, it feels like information and it feels like security. Receiving the notifications and the sense of awareness of what's going on feels like in those moments for people, like they are staying vigilant. And in a lot of ways, the opposite is true for a lot of people.
You think that the reaction is kind of autonomous, but sometimes it's not autonomous, and you choose to have that reaction. Why are partial stories so powerful?
Well, they're so powerful. We're narrative creatures. We fill in the blanks with our imagination or with our lived experiences or information from our own belief systems. And so when we receive a partial or brief story, we are prone to finish it. And so that's really powerful. And it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy for us to do that. Think a lot of people can relate to that. I mean, if we even step outside of thinking about the digital world, how many times have we finished a conversation in our own head in preparation for something? Or we prepare ourselves, right, for a confrontation that we think might happen. And so we rehearse this whole narrative.
And then nothing happens.
And then nothing happens.
You spent
Yes,
all that time
that's right.
worrying about the future, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. We are narrative creatures. When the alarm goes off in the morning, there is a voice in our head that says, right, either, oh, I'm going to push snooze just once, I'm not ready, or, right, great, I can't wait to tackle today. There's always a story and a voice happening within us.
And I think that's kind of part of the problem with how society is framing information. They feed you that one pellet and not a whole meal. And that one pellet forces you to kind of create a narrative. And it seems like people want to believe their narratives more than they want to actually believe facts because they heard this one small crumb of a fact, but and there's a bigger picture to it. And I think that's the hardest thing is trying to kind of disseminate from that one small partial fact to the whole story.
Yeah, and we see that outside of news stories. Working with a lot of new moms, we hear this about right when pregnant or first having a child and becoming a parent, a lot of people have opinions. A lot of people have beliefs of what is the best way to navigate that time in life. The difference is now we can go out and we can Google and get confirmation to whatever that bias is of us in whatever we believe is best, creating a lot of noise. And so that confirmation bias happens. And then once we enter that space where now we have found the group of people or the voice that matches ours, we're in an echo chamber of everybody else who sees it that way. And that feels factual. So now we feel like we have that to stand on as evidence to say, this is why this way's correct and your way is wrong.
That echo chamber kind of creates that follower mentality as
Mm-hmm.
well when you kind of look at it from a perspective, right? You hear it enough times, you eventually believe it or start to parrot it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we forget in that there can be more than one truth happening at the same time. There can be more than one way to raise a child at the same time. There can be more than one way to navigate your investments. And so when we get into that echo chamber, we create tunnel vision for ourselves.
You kind of get that kind of information bias where you believe it. And I have a few people that I know that they just have one source of truth, and no matter what, if you try to explain something and say, well, that's not exactly true, here's what we have as information to contradict that. Oh no, that's not true. Well, it's hard to figure out what's true and what's not true in today's society, especially social media is fast. Before anything happens, there's something out there.
Yeah. Well, and a couple things I think about is that in that survival mechanism, that fight or flight response that gets activated when we are engaged in that sense of media or that echo chamber, they talk about, right, that the parts of the brain that are then engaged in that, the amygdala, the dopamine system, what becomes disengaged is our prefrontal cortex. And so the prefrontal cortex and the areas of the prefrontal cortex are the parts of the brain that give us that critical thinking, that judgment. If I do this, then what might happen? And really, we used to be taught that that part of the brain or that the brain as a whole was done developing around 25. And now I'm starting to see scientists are saying that's probably closer to 27. And so what happens is that when we are in that survival loop and we are not exercising the prefrontal cortex, we're helping to delay its maturity, right? So every opportunity we have to critically think something through and then engage in an action around that and then learning from that to say this worked, that didn't. It's like a little dumbbell exercise for the prefrontal cortex. And so concerns about what happens in the use of this rapid fire information, either through 24/7 notifications or through social media platforms, to the development of that in young people, and also in the not using and not continuing to exercise that part of the brain in people who maybe already have the fully developed brain. And so that's a really interesting thing to think about because part of our survival doesn't need to stop and contemplate what might be in the bush. It needs the part of the brain that makes our legs move to get us out of there. And so, very interesting how that becomes disengaged. And that also then leaves us vulnerable, creating this whole cycle where we think we're feeling empowered in information. And really, are we more vulnerable if we're not than critically thinking and using all of our brain to discern that information.
One of the things is there anything that you can recommend for people to kind of start kind of exercising their frontal cortex?
Absolutely. So there are some great resources online in regards to and books. There's some really great books out there like How to Quit Your Phone, things like that. In regards to talking about making distance and friction with whatever the device is. And so maybe making, well, and let me back up for a second. Currently in our community, there is a community through our Chamber of Commerce and some other partnerships going on in regards to social media use. And they're providing a bunch of information and resources throughout the community in regards to the effects, both physically, biologically, emotionally, in continuing to use without that balance. And that's what really this is about. I know there's also a lot of books and conversation that creates a lot of panic for people. And I'm not suggesting we panic. In fact, I think that finding balance and appropriate boundaries with information and our devices is actually more empowering than feeling that constant sense of awareness. And so we talk about this a lot in the counseling process and how to do that with a lot of things. Boundaries are really healthy and appropriate in our life, both with people and things. And so we talk about distance and friction. So, do we have maybe some screen free rooms in our home? Is that our bedrooms? So at night when we go to sleep, we can, right, be fully able to find rest. Sleep is the foundation of all our health. There's some data out there that tells us that using a phone or a tablet with that blue light between the hours of 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. can decrease dopamine production in our brain for up to 4 days. So, big advantage to having this boundary of a bedroom being a screen free zone. Now, I get it. Myself, I no longer have a landline at home, right? The phone is the source of information. So, where does that look? Where does the phone need to be, or how can we create space so that we can provide ourselves that boundary for sleep? Is the dining room table, when the family's sitting around the dining room table, is that the screen free zone? Where are the zones that when we are home, we make some physical limits? Distance and friction can also be maybe that we no longer have a specific app. We have to go onto the tablet or the computer and log on to the site. Some more friction could be not using the password saving feature on a phone or the computer, having to log in. All of those things give us a moment to engage the prefrontal cortex so that we can make a different decision. Another thing they talk about is the 20-20-20 rule. Give yourself 20 minutes on the app or write the news, whatever it is, and then give yourself a 20-second break looking at something 20 feet away. And so the idea of that is to relax the eye strain, give the brain a break, and allow the prefrontal cortex to engage to say, okay, how long have I been doing this? How does my body feel? Am I hungry? Right? We know that the infinite scroll feature that some platforms have, people don't sense their need for a bathroom break or hunger or thirst. And so giving ourselves even those like 20-second breaks is long enough for the brain to say, hey, great, I've been needing a drink of water. So those are some strategies. awareness. There's a lot of information out there right now to be aware when scrolling and looking. Like we talked about earlier, right? If we see a headline, we get a notification, being aware of, what am I experiencing when I read that? What did I feel? Where did I feel that? There is a natural tendency, especially when we feel that confirmation bias, to want to hit share, or there becomes this urge to want to share or tell somebody as a way to confirm, see, I was correct. And so by giving ourselves that pause to say, what is this about for me? How come this is so impactful for me? That gives us that moment to engage the prefrontal cortex to give us some space. Another thing I know a lot of people are moving towards, and I think this is great. I mean, I remember after dinner, Walter Cronkite on the news, sitting down, giving you everything you needed to know, and then it's done and over, right? Or the newspaper came, you read it, and that's all you got for the day. That was it. And so a lot of concerns in regards to notifications are, we don't have the full story yet, right? We have just the clip of information of what happened and nothing else. And so it activates this stress response that is our fight or flight. We then get into our confirmation bias, an echo chamber, and then all our narrative self creating the rest of the story. So movement towards giving yourself a time a day to consume the news and be done. I find for myself, right, like in the morning over coffee is a great time for me personally to read news. That is when I feel at my best to be able to say, okay, now I know, and my day has to start. I don't have time to dwell on this, to continue to write like hunt and peck or search more about this. I have to take some of that information and it's just going to have to process throughout the rest of my day. That works for me. Some people may need the coffee fully on board before they try that, right? It's also being aware, what time of day do you feel your best to be able to hold yourself accountable to some healthy boundaries related to taking on information and activating your emotional self?
Yeah, I've definitely doom scrolled and a couple hours go by and you're like,
Mm,
well, that I can't get that time back, and I was just watching stupid stuff, you know?
sure.
Why do you
Yeah.
think people defend opinions like they're defending their own identity?
Oh, so this kind of goes back to that anthropology, survival psychology stuff in that we are wired for in-group, out-group. Survival is in having a group, having a tribe. And so oftentimes you do see people gathering or finding social connection through belief systems, right? Whether that be through religious organizations, community volunteering groups, work through, right? A whole host of ways that people gather together through clubs or whatever it might be. And so it taps into that survival system. And if now I'm in my in group and that is a sense of security and safety, having a difference of opinion or belief could make me vulnerable on the outside of that group. I find it really interesting, right, that we have more ways than ever before in human history to stay connected. And yet, loneliness is deemed an epidemic. And so my personal thoughts about that are that it plays on that system of feeling like you are in the out group. if I walk my neighborhood and everyone has a sign in their yard that's posted different than my belief systems, I don't feel like this is my community, my group. If online I am scrolling through all the difference of opinion of all the people I have friended on a social media platform, that doesn't feel like in group. Feels very lonely. I think that one of the best studies we have is the Harvard had a very long-term study on health and happiness, and the thing that outweighed all other variables for health was a sense of connection. And people who felt connected to others in a meaningful way had better longevity health outcomes, even over a control group of people who smoke cigarettes. And right, we now know it's been confirmed smoking cigarettes is detrimental to one's health. And so that that has been that in the Attorney General of the US several years ago had put out a paper with that information and others confirming the level of loneliness amongst our country and the crisis that holds, and that those connections, those friend requests and connections, or those things that happen on social media aren't really hitting that real sense of connection that people need to survive.
Well, I think you look at it too is you put something out there and the algorithm chooses kind of where it goes and who sees it,
Yeah.
and you might have something you pour your heart into and you think it was really great, and then you get one like, and then next thing you know you're like, well, this sucks.
Yeah. So talking about the algorithm, so there was a documentary several years ago out in regards to how social media works in regards to that algorithm. Not sure if you've ever watched that. It blew my mind. I knew, right, that it seemed pretty obvious that if I liked a post, right, or I commented on a post, that would make sense that that would be clocked on my algorithm, that maybe I want to see more of that. I did not know that when you're scrolling and you just slow down over a post, that also clocks on your algorithm that maybe you have interest in that and it will show you more of that.
Yeah, I think it's like
So,
the 1 to 3 second. I think that's kind of what they
yeah,
consider it, and that's like, oh, you paused, so now we
you
can target you.
correct. And so that is a way other people can be also empowered in regards to changing their algorithm. Engage with things on social media platforms that bring you joy, right? I feel very proud of my algorithm. There's a lot of sourdough, there's a lot of puppies, there's a lot of things that, right, are part of my hobbies and recreation that I do. And so we have power to change that algorithm by how we engage on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of things, and it seems like every time I mention something, it's on my all my feeds everywhere, and it's like, well, I just talked about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's kind of creepy.
So, kind of on that note, what should we ask ourselves before we share something online? Taking a quick pause here. If this episode is resonating, I would love for you to follow the No One is Normal podcast on whatever platform you listen on. Every follow helps this show reach people who might need these stories. Now let's jump back in.
Yeah, I think the same thing maybe we ask ourselves before we engage in a lot of behavior. How do I benefit from this? What does that do for me? Will this help somebody? Will this help me? What's my motivation? Taking that moment to self reflect and be aware of what's at risk, what's to gain. Am I really going to change anyone's mind? Am I hoping somebody says, oh, look at that, you were right? Are they really going to do that? Right? Give yourself a moment to say, do right, there's a method, it's called SIFT, SIFT, and it talks about this in a different way about sharing information in regards to what's the source, right? Where's the information from? Is this the whole story? Um, Maybe things like that as well, right? Not only your internal motivation and interest in having that conversation with yourself, also, how can I be certain that what I am sharing is true, right? How do I feel about my belief system in regards to social media platforms and these things? If I engage with this, am I aligned with my beliefs about that? Am I feeding something I actually really have strong feelings against or I wish was different? If I want to see a positive change, if I share this, am I part of that positive change? So, really having that insight and awareness versus that emotional reaction.
Yeah, I think that's probably the I think very hard for a lot of people to just not have that instant reaction. And you know, how can we stay informed without being reactive?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is something that a lot of people identify in therapy as a goal of being less reactive and more responsive. And so there is, I use an analogy that it aligns well often with addiction, and it's not exactly the same. So I don't want that to be lost in that when we react to something, there's a whole chemical process that happens reinforcing that. And that includes dopamine, right? Saying, that felt good, do it again. And so once then we're in that space of that felt good, do it again, right? We're also now engaging in that confirmation bias, that feedback loop. We're not engaged with any kind of dissonance. And so this whole emotional thing happens reinforcing that loop. And so, really, what we want to do is we want to give ourselves that break, that time out, so we can self reflect to respond. When we react regularly, that becomes like a knee jerk reaction. And it becomes something that we are no longer thinking about. We're not engaged in that behavior. And we're more prone after the fact to feel badly. We're more prone to feel regretful, to feel shame and embarrassment or a sense of guilt. Sometimes those reactions do lead us to hurting people we love and care about or engaging in a way that is unprofessional, and there become consequences to that. And so in holding ourselves accountable to that pause gives us the ability to be more responsive. And that really is the goal. And there, I recently saw that just in, I think it was 2017, our our focus time, our ability to like stay engaged on media, like social media platforms, was something like 2.7 minutes long or something like that.
Like a
And
goldfish, right?
now it's like 40 seconds.
It's getting
And now it's 40
worse.
seconds. And like I have noticed that about myself. There have been like articles of things like I'm actually really interested in, and I'll be like, oh, that feels like too many words, right? Like our
Exactly.
focus is changing. We are training ourselves to live in this reactive state. Yeah.
Yeah, we're using our synapses to kind of give us
Mm-hmm.
the quick feedback to let it out, and
Yeah.
it's not healthy.
Well, and right, and then interesting talking about synapses. So then what happens is because of this constant state of stress, We don't need pleasure to survive. So the brain actually reduces the amount of dopamine receptors we have. So then when we do engage in behaviors that have historically led us to feeling pleasure and joy, it just doesn't feel the same. It's not as enjoyable, it's not as pleasurable. And so then, of course, right, we go back to that other thing that takes us into the reactive state because that feels better. And so I've seen some data that says we need approximately 4 days off of screens to reset that system.
Well, I'm all for a 3-day work week. If we can swing that somehow, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What does healthy digital maturity look like?
That's a great question. And I think that is different for everybody, right? We all develop very differently. Maturity is different at different stages in life. I think that's also very hard to define in that we are all just learning as we go right now. Um, you know, Parents struggle with their own boundaries and screen time. And so, how then do we navigate what that maturity might look like for our kids if we struggle with that ourselves? And so, there's a lot of information out there now, and this is relatively more recent in recommending 15, 16 years old for smartphones and social media platforms and, a wealth of information to support that age based on one's development and maturity level, and also the ability to help develop those healthy boundaries. And I think that's really what the message is how do we develop healthy boundaries? Moderation. And so, at what age does that happen for people, and how do we navigate that as part of normalcy? I think that's very individual for families and people. And I think we also recognize, right, when we walk away from those things, how we feel about it. Are you feeling like obsessed or compulsed with like returning back to the device? If you create this zone-free zone, say it's in your living room and you're watching TV in the living room with the family and you've left your phone in the kitchen, how often are you like feeling curious about what's on the phone or like where is my phone and things like that? So it becomes very individual in who we are, what our relationship has been with the phone. And I think when we give ourselves time and space and that friction, we are able to see for ourselves what those boundaries need to be and what that maturity looks like. I will say I do, in working with teenagers, they're my only population of clients who I never see their phone out on the sofa next to them in a session. They tend to, at least, and not all of them, right? Most of the teenagers I work with have a really much more um, insightful, what's the word I'm looking for? Relationship with technology, even if they're recognizing like, hey, I realize like I'm on this way too much. They use language such as like, yep, I'm totally addicted to my phone, I know I am, like, and so show a lot more insight and awareness to their phone use and how they feel about that than a lot of adults seem to. And that's just been my experience in working with people. And I think part of that is it's not novel to young people. The phone and technology, the internet has always been there. They they are there isn't this newness that sometimes adults still feel in regards to technology and finding a new app or learning something different on the phone. Yeah, that's still exciting for a lot of people that it's not for young kids.
Do you think it kind of can lead to a little more generational kind of struggles? Some generations struggle more than others.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in different ways. One of the things that we recognize is right back to that focus and attention span. I think we're going to see that, and I think we're probably already seeing it, right? That how things are marketed or, how we complete and do things in the future is going to have to change to accommodate that change in focus and attention span. I mean, I think we definitely know have lost a lot of patience in this time where everything's rapidly coming at us. And I recently saw, I was aware of these commercials that like, get this product for your hair and you'll have visible differences by morning. Get this face cream and within 5 hours you will notice, more toned skin. And I thought, wow, like we can't even give the whole bottle time to work. It has to be as fast as today. Yeah, I think that's true for all of us across the board, though.
In my 20s and 30s, you always seen the young kids with the tablet in front of their face, and it's like, oh man, and I'm hopefully they grew out of it. I know with myself personally, I'm on a lot of social media trying to plug the show, and I'm always out there and putting myself out there. Yeah, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. I tell you one thing, it is nice when I shut it down and I'm like, okay, I can't be looking at what's going on in the world. I need to focus on me and kind of keep myself grounded and not be putting myself in a situation where I'm harming myself and not giving myself the kind of the personal healing and me time I need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I notice I try very hard to be more responsive to communicating with the people in my life. So when I receive a text message from friends or family, I don't want to leave them unread, or I don't want to read it and forget about them and not follow through in communication. So I've made a point to prioritize those notifications. And another barrier and boundary that can happen is turning off essential notifications. I don't receive notifications on my email. I have it turned off. I don't want a breaking news alert, right? I don't have social media notifying me that somebody sent me something. That is another way we can create a boundary. And so, right, the notifications I have are communications that is coming through of my contacts of people, right, that I know personally in my everyday life that I'm connected to. I used to love to deep dive into a news story and take on every angle of that. That became exhausting, right? That fatigue of, and it used to be much easier to do that. And maybe that was what was enjoyable about it, right? It was maybe two, three news articles, and you got a really good sense of most of the angles of what was going on. That has become exhausting. Two, three articles doesn't do it anymore. And so I no longer deep dive into specific, I do for things that pertain professionally, but in regards to current events and such, um, I've had to create a boundary with that for myself. And so, yeah, evaluating what's important to me. And so for me, I've really prioritized people are important to me. And so that is the top of the priority.
You got to figure out that time constraint with work, life. You got marriage, you got kids, significant other,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you have in life. You got to make sure that you have that balance. And then, I that was part of my problem growing up is I always wanted to do something different because that felt exciting and new
Yeah.
and then you get to the point where like if you're doing it over and over, it's like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't fun, this isn't exciting. It's kind of
Yeah.
like with a podcast editing. Everybody loves talking with people and having a conversation, but then after that it's like, well, now I got to go into editing and then I got to spend 3 4 hours going through this and
Yeah.
editing and making everything sound and look okay. And you know to me that still matters a lot because the conversation, I want to make sure that I'm putting the best product out there for that
Sure.
person, you know?
Yeah.
But it's easy to fall into that loop where you're just like, oh, I got to do this again. And I just did
Yeah.
it like yesterday or the day before. But
Right.
so, like, what are some resources for people who are currently struggling?
Yeah, there are. So the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, has a lot of resources, as does SAMHSA. There are within our local community right now, like I said, the Chamber of Commerce is currently doing a campaign in regards to helping people find balance and boundaries in regards to social media use and just technology use in general. Getting into counseling. When you put the phone in the other room and you walk away, what's that experience like for you? Is there a lot of anxiety and discomfort, right? What is that about? What healing or growth is there opportunity for in recognizing that? Um, what fears, a lot of fears have become activated for people in regards to their safety or their ability to maintain their safety. For a lot of people, right, there becomes a loss of what's realistic in that, right? Part of the headline without full information or the sense of urgency in receiving breaking news is that we have this false sense of our safety and well-being that doesn't align with the reality of the world we live in. And so what is our support system? What is the therapy that could be helpful in regards to that? What are the community resources around? But NAMI and SAMHSA are doing a great job in talking about digital health in regards to resources and helping people. 988, that is a great resource as well. That is not only a telephone number for suicidal thoughts, that is also a resource for things such as feeling mentally overwhelmed, lost, fearful. It's a great resource as well. So those are three of the things that I am immediately aware of nationally.
Yeah, and I put on my website, I put in on the 988 mental health, domestic
Mm-hmm.
violence, a lot of contact for people to call, text to the website, substance use, sexual assault, LGBTQ plus support,
Yep.
youth and teen help, local services too, which a lot of people kind of overlook. The
Yeah.
211, which is a
Yep.
kind of an important one, and then the Veterans Crisis Line.
It's
So
hotline. Mm-hmm.
trying to give everybody an opportunity to, if they need something, hopefully it can help, right?
Absolutely. So it sounds like your website is also a great resource.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope people can utilize the information and hopefully get the help or get
Yeah.
whatever they need. It doesn't have to be help. It just having that conversation sometimes helps.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think one of the big things that kind of encompasses this whole conversation is FOMO, fear of
Um,
missing out.
yeah.
Do you not agree
Yeah.
with that? I think that's a lot of what we as humans are afraid we're going to miss something.
Yes. Fear of missing out and comparison are also traps people fall into in the digital space. Absolutely. Fear of being unaware. Um, I think it's really interesting, and I often, when we're talking about the comparison that happens, I find it ironic that like cultural first day of school picture that people post happens outside on the front stoop, not in the kitchen, not in the living room, right? Because most likely the first day of school is often very chaotic for families. It is a much cleaner, nicer image, right? Outside in front of the front door. And so oftentimes I am, and I think oftentimes I forget the advantage of the work I do is that I am invited into the nooks and crannies of people's lives. So I don't often seek the nooks and crannies of people's lives outside of work, right? Like I forget people zoom in on pictures, right? And are like looking at backgrounds. And I think that my line of my profession has kind of like helped me not to be less interested in that. And so people often stage, right? I'm gonna take this picture, I'm gonna have my kids stand there because the dirty hamper isn't there or all the toys aren't strewn about over there. So that is I mean, there are so many different conversations we could have about the psychological, emotional pitfalls of our current digital day and age. And yes, absolutely FOMO comparison, absolutely part of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know one thing's for sure. I'm probably going to go back to reading the Lucky Charms box for breakfast, just give myself that opportunity to not kind of reach for that phone.
Yeah, well, and I think too, I mean, and there are certainly benefits. I think about the number of communities that people can find through Facebook when going through hard times or things that are unique to them, or they're not ready to share personally with the people in their circle. There are connections that can happen in online space or information, right? There's a lot of information that we can become aware of that can helpfully improve our sense of empathy or compassion towards other people through exposure to people's lives and experiences outside of ours. Those things do also exist. It's are we getting lost in our reaction dopamine cycle in that fight or flight response that we are losing out and then not having that balance of, right, seeing other things that are much more meaningful and important.
Having the ability to get away from the screen for a little bit, get away from social media, give yourself that little bit of a pause, like you stated. Give us that opportunity to kind of have a life where we actually are engaging with other people versus social media where you're looking at a screen. And it's more fulfilling to have that personal contact than it is to swipe or have a like. Or it is nice to see a like or a heart, or and people to like your thoughts, but you know to me, I think it's more important to be personal with people and having that natural feeling with being around people. I think that tends to create more joy than scrolling and
Yeah,
seeing somebody else's artificial life
right.
propositioned on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One of the things in preparation for today, you had asked, what did I feel like was the truth people needed to hear? And so anyone who knows me or has spoke with me in other professional contexts will not be surprised about what's about to come out of my mouth. Our feelings are not facts. How we feel is information. It's information about our lived experiences, our fears, our future goals, our hopes, our dreams. It's information about our biases. It's information about how we were raised and the belief systems we were surrounded with. It is information about a lot of things. It is not a fact. And it is one variable in the decision making equation. And so the decision making equation of should I share this, should I post this, is if it is purely in reaction to a feeling, the answer is no. right? So kind of the theme today has been about that balance. And if we're talking about balancing our time and our energy and our well-being in a digital world, balancing our engagement in that digital world in the same way, and not reacting based on a feeling, because feelings are not facts.
Yeah, they're chemical reactions that your
That's right.
body's creating so that it has
Yeah.
that natural response to whatever you're feeling.
Yeah, and it's very different than a guttural response, right? If I'm walking down a dark alley in the middle of the night alone and my gut says, get out of here, listen, get out of there, right? That is very different when we're safe and sound and our livelihood is not at stake and it's an emotional feeling. That is not a fact. Our feelings mean pause, take time, set it down, walk away, right? Yeah, let it process. Talk to somebody you really trust or respect in regards to what you're experiencing. In couples counseling, they often talk about, right, like, don't react to that feeling. If you still feel the same way tomorrow, then it needs more attention. That idea of creating that pause in relationship with people so we're not reacting to every nuance and annoyance. And so, yeah, our feelings aren't facts.
Yeah, and like you said, not everything deserves attention. You got to filter
Not
that
everything
out too,
deserves attention.
right?
Yeah. And so there's another hard truth. And I'm not a kind of counselor that prescribes a lot of homework for people. I do strongly encourage we need to spend more time in thought and energy of other people. The
I
digital
agree.
world has allowed us to stay insular, and I don't see many good things from staying in that space chronically. Um, Thinking about other people. That means even just sending a text message on someone's birthday or hadn't talked to somebody in a while, clocking that, thinking about that, realizing, give them a phone call, send them an email, send a card, volunteer, right? Follow up on a conversation you had with somebody. Stop and think about things that are going on in the lives of people you care about and get out and spend energy in service to others. Once again, balance, balance.
On that note, Shelly, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Yes.
I valued the conversation, and hopefully, people can take something away from this and maybe start kind of controlling what they're letting affect them on social media.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brad. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day.
The modern world gives us more information than any generation before us, but access to information does not automatically lead to clarity. In many cases, it creates the opposite: noise, distraction, and emotional reactions that leave people feeling more overwhelmed than informed. What stood out in this conversation is the reminder that awareness is the first step toward balance. Recognizing how information affects our emotions, attention, and relationships allows us to regain some control over how we engage with it. Technology itself is not the problem. The challenge is learning how to use it without letting it quietly shape how we think and react. If this episode resonated, it may be because many of us are trying to navigate that balance right now, finding ways to stay informed without becoming consumed, staying connected without losing the ability to think clearly. Sometimes that begins with something very simple: putting the phone down long enough to remember what a real connection feels like. Just a reminder, the stories and conversations in this podcast are for informational and personal reflection only. Nothing shared here should be taken as medical, legal, or professional advice. Always speak with a qualified professional about your own personal situation. Thank you for listening to No One Is Normal. If today's message resonated with you, you can find the book No One Is Normal on Amazon and Kindle, and explore more resources at www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co. Remember, you weren't meant to be normal, you were meant to be you.